She got away, she got away, she got away, she got away, oh she got away, oh she got away.
Welcome to She Got Away, the show where I, Kibby Linga, share my journey of survival and healing from the depths of satanic ritual abuse, or SRA. SRA is an extreme form of abuse, often silenced, where criminal activities intersect with unspeakable acts of sexual abuse. Through my narrative, I aspire to share my story to help my own healing journey, to give a voice to children being trafficked, to spread awareness, and to relate to other survivors. I believe this topic should be talked about. This podcast is for anyone with an open mind who also doesn't get triggered by evil. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. It won't be all gloom or doom. Let's go spread some light. Hi friends, welcome to episode 4 of She Got Away, Faith After Religious Abuse. I'm your host, Kibby Linga. Today we'll discuss a little of the religious abuse I experienced, how it affected me, my relationship with God or my higher power, who I choose to call God or our creator, and what my faith looks like today. This is now a bi-weekly podcast, and I've missed you guys these past 2 weeks. But I hope to give you guys bonus episodes when I can. It does take a lot of pressure off of me to not have this be every 7 days. This is a lot easier for me, but yeah, so we're bi-weekly now, guys, but I hope to give you some bonus episodes. I also am excited because I'm hopefully in the near future going to have people on this podcast, and I'm so excited for that. I'm so excited for us. So, what does my faith look like after satanic ritual abuse or being extremely religiously abused? And I don't know if every satanic ritual abuse survivor was extremely religiously abused, so I am not saying that. But in my experience, I was severely religiously abused. My mom truly used the teachings from the Catholic Church to rationalize her behavior. I believe my mom was in a religious psychosis. I don't know, I don't understand the psychology of my mom, but I will tell you about my religious abuse in a nutshell. I could talk about faith and my religious abuse for hours and hours or books and books. It's a long story. So let's get into it. Let's start with getting the religious abuse out of the way. So, growing up until I was around 8 years old, my mom was a part of the Catholic Church, and from what I was told, it was even before I was even born. Anyways, she used it as a front. She was... I don't fully understand her. I don't know if she truly believed in Jesus or God, and that she used Jesus actually. She didn't talk about God, and that's why I trusted God. We'll get into that more later, but she seemed to worship Jesus and the devil at the same time. It was so confusing. Either that or she convinced me that she was worshiping Jesus, but she only was worshiping the devil. Anyways, she religiously abused in many ways, but mainly by kind of like pretending to be these religious figures, the main being Jesus. When I would go to her and say, "Why are you sacrificing these children?" Like, why? She told me that she was like the chosen modern day Jesus, and it was her job to do this within the family to not only wash away our family sins, but everyone else's around us. She said she was a modern day Jesus, and I did not buy that. And to this day, I am extremely still triggered by Jesus, but that was her main rationalization for her behavior, and one way she used Jesus against me. She was also fixated on the mother of Jesus, who's Mary, and Mother Teresa, and would sometimes even like say she was them or as important as them. It was very confusing to me. Meanwhile, I was, going to church weekly, Sunday school sometimes. When I would go to church, I would almost pass out because it was like, what? It was very confusing going to church because all these things were happening at home. And I grew to not trust religious figures. For example, Jesus, the Mother of Mary, Mother Teresa, the prophets, the Messiahs, Jesus. Like, because my mom was using these figures against me, I just could smell the bull crap. And I'm like, okay, the only one she's not using against me is God. And that's one reason why I chose a connection with God, because I heard about the church talking about God, and to me, he was the good guy. And she wasn't like using God against me at home. She was using all these other figures, these statues, these teachings, like, but not God. So somehow I trusted God. And I say God only because I grew up in the Catholic Church. If I grew up somewhere where they call him Allah or something else, that's probably what I would call him. But because as a kid, I literally called him God, that's who I choose to call him today. But the truth is, I have no idea what his name is. It's my higher power who I choose to call God, but to me, it's our creator. So she religiously abused me by using these other figures like Jesus and others to pretend to pose to be them or as important as them, I think as a way to gain power or something. I don't know, to rationalize her behaviors. And I went against her being the defiant child I was and was like, okay, if you're worshiping and loving these figures so much, I'm going to go love the one you're not talking about, which was God. When it comes to my triggers with religion and Jesus, I feel like I've come a long way. Just 3 or 4 years ago, I could only understand God and only God, and I would exempt myself from any discussion or conversation about religion. It triggered me too much. And I have a lot of Christian friends. I would even ask my closest friends to please replace the word Jesus with God for me, and thankfully, they did. That was just so kind of them reflecting back. I'm very grateful. So I have come a long ways because today I can say Jesus is my friend. I respect Jesus. I respect Jesus because I've seen Jesus help so many. I also, in my recovery, as I've started to share my story, I myself am learning about religion. And religion triggered me so much before I started sharing my story, but listening to you guys in the comments, and then I'm also doing some research on the side. This is beautiful to me, for me to be able to gain the strength to explore this area, because Jesus and religion has been a very heavy trigger for me. I do question the legitimacy of Jesus and the story behind it, but that's the thing with me. When it comes to religion, I'm a question asker, and there's just not one religion that makes complete sense to me yet. And you know what? I don't know if there ever will be. Maybe God just wants us to pick what works for us. Or maybe there's one religion that's right and everybody else is wrong. I don't know. I could talk about this forever. I am happy working the 12-step programs, having a higher power who I choose to call God, and I trust that God will lead me the way if he wants me to sign up or be a part of organized religions. So I'm not currently religious, but I feel that I have a big faith. I get very excited to talk about this topic, and I want to share it with you. I wore a white shirt today for hope, because for hope, I use white. I can't give my higher power's personality, who I choose to call God, one color because I feel like he deserves every color, but I wore white because that's my color for hope. And I get hope from God. That's why hope reminds me of God. I don't think white is God's personality color. He deserves them all, but white is hope for me, so I wore a white shirt today, and I love hope. I get hope from God. So when I was a young child, before I could even articulate and understand that God was a good guy, I saw that my mom's behaviors were clearly worshiping or following the dark. I knew there was another side to that. I knew that there were good people in the world. I knew that there was no way everyone was as evil as my mom. I don't know how I knew that. I don't know how I had the gift of discernment as a child. I do remember me, before I could even speak, knowing that I was born into a family of evil or with evil parents. I knew that I had feelings because I was sad. And then when I saw my mom hurt other people like me, I knew it was wrong, because that would have been like somebody hurting me, and that was wrong because I had feelings. I've always had this thing with feelings. I could do another episode on just feelings, but when I was a child, and that was my biggest fight when I would fight my mom with these sacrifices, was I said, this is wrong because these kids have feelings like me. So I saw that before I could even speak. I don't remember exactly when, but I could tell that what she was doing was wrong simply because I could see that she was hurting somebody that looked like me, and I knew that hurting me would have been wrong because I have feelings and I don't deserve to be hurt like that. No one does. So I do remember having a lot of thoughts about how this was wrong because she was hurting people that had feelings. If she was sacrificing pillows, I don't think I would have felt the same way because I knew pillows didn't have feelings. So as a young child, loving feelings, and I loved feelings because I was sad a lot, and I realized when I would have my feelings, it would help me get through these rough times and give me strength to move forward. I'm a fan of having feelings. I've always gotten rewarded for having my feelings, and God taught me this. I believe my intuition told me that what my parents was doing was wrong, and it gave me an opportunity to seek something that was right. Another way I remember looking at it as a kid was following the light versus following the darkness. I even have a painting called I Choose to Follow the Light. I'll put it right here. It's green with the 6 primary and secondary colors, and then white for hope. This piece reminds me of my very, very early years where I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I knew that there was good and evil, and I wanted to follow the good, or the light. So that was my relationship before I found God at the church, and then I told you then how I started to call him God after I started going to church and learning the names. But when I really realized that my higher power or God was real was when I was locked in a cage at night or in the evenings. I'm a middle child. I have an older sister and a younger sister, and we're all close in age. I would always stand up for my beliefs and say, this is wrong, 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 in front of the family, any chance I could. And my mom didn't want me brainwashing my sisters, so oftentimes during nighttime, when it would be like dinner time and talk time, she would put me in the basement in this cage. The same cage my dad would go and pick the children up in. My mom would feed me human food sometimes for dinner, and sometimes she would feed me human flesh. I would spit it out and put it underneath the blanket and prayed she would never say anything, and thankfully she never did. Anyways, being in the cage was awful. Just awful. It was disgusting. I felt shameful. I felt so sad. I was so scared. I was so claustrophobic. I felt so helpless. I felt contained. I physically wasn't okay. I had to keep my bowels in. Like, I wasn't okay in this cage. So I'm in this cage, and I couldn't do it. I needed somebody. I needed something. And so I went to God, or I had dialogue in my head, and I'm like, please, God, come help me. And God came, and right away, and all of a sudden, my fear was gone. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but it was gone. Like, actually, the cage became an enjoyable place for me. Because God was there. God was there with me in this cage. My fear was gone. It just went away. And not only that, but I felt safe enough in this cage, being locked up and starving, to have my feelings because God was there. I even started to use my time in the cage as like having my feeling time, and it became like a therapeutic thing. It sounds crazy, but that's how I know God is true to me. Not only that, but God has always had my back, or my higher power, who I choose to call God, has always had my back, even in my years of denial. But that cage and how my physical, just everything just went away. I mean, I presume I peed and pooped myself a little bit, but like the fear, and I was okay. I was not only okay, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore when God showed up with me in that cage. The cage sucked, but I'm grateful because it got me so desperate to call on God. And because I called on God, I was shown that this creator or this God thing works. And thank you, right? I already had my suspicions that there was good and stuff, and I knew about the light versus darkness and good behaviors versus bad. But when I was in the cage and God showed up for me, that was very validating that there was so much hope and beauty outside of my family, the adults of my family. So anyways, I maintained a relationship with God after the cage until my years of denial, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But during those years of until like 9 years old, I remember I would use unique ways to keep in conscious contact with God other than praying. For example, I would take the weather as a way to send and receive communication with Him or have a connection with Him. When there is a sunset every day I saw a sunset, even on the dark days, I thought it was beautiful. A sunset can't fail me. When the sun goes down, the sky is always beautiful to me in some way. And I wondered how God could make such beauty out of this world's pain. And that gave me hope that I can turn my pain into beauty, and that there's beauty out there that isn't painful. And I thought his sunsets were his painting for the day, like the way he saw it. Even on days when there's no colors in the sunset or it's storming, I've always found it to be beautiful when our day goes from day to night. The sky always looks like a beautiful painting to me, whether there's colors or not. Another way I would connect with my higher power or God as a child is when it would rain. I thought when it was raining that God was crying. He was expressing his grief. That was just what was going on in my childhood. So when it would rain, I thought that God was expressing his grief, and I could be there for him, and I felt like connected to him when it rained. And then when there was a rainbow, which there often was, I thought it was his reward for having his feelings, and that inspired me too. That when I have my feelings, I get a reward, and I do. When I have my feelings, like, I get through it, I become stronger, I find the next step or the solution, I get a spiritual triumph. There's always some type of reward or rewards that I get for having my feelings, like a rainbow. And when it stormed, or there was a tornado, I lived in the Midwest, so either one, I thought God was sick, and it was giving me an opportunity to trust with him that things were going to be okay. I feel like storms or tornadoes, in a way, helped strengthen my relationship with my higher power by helping me trust more. Sounds like a lot? It is. And this is the stuff that got me through. When I was in denial, that relationship that I just explained to you that I had with my higher power or God as a child was just gone. It was inexistent at the time. It was on a shelf. I didn't even care about the sunsets during my years of denial. Something that helped me so much as a child, I had completely forgotten during my years of denial. I'd forgotten like all of it during my years of denial, including the beautiful, beautiful sunsets from God. So when I was age 13-ish to 30, I was in denial, and those were also the years that I lost my relationship with God. So at age 30, when I started getting help for my PTSD and my childhood trauma, I first started with going to the 12-step rooms. At this point, I was 30 years old. I was very sick in my denial. I was using coping mechanisms to stay in denial that were destructive towards my health. I was in complete denial about ages 0 to 9. I was very disconnected from myself. And the first 12-step program I worked at age 30 was Overeaters Anonymous. It's like a food program. I had disordered eating. That was one of my coping mechanisms. And within about 6 months, I started working ACA, or Adult Children of Alcoholics, which is more of a childhood wound or childhood trauma-based 12-step program. In these 12-step programs, I, at first, needed to go from denial to truth, and I talk about that in episode 2. And that was difficult, and remembering my childhood didn't happen overnight, and same with remembering my relationship with my higher power or God. In fact, those happened later after most of the really bad flashbacks came up, and when I remembered my relationship with my higher power or God, those were the best flashbacks ever. I'm grateful for those flashbacks. So in the 12-step programs, one of the steps is to come to believe in a power greater than yourself. And I knew I had a lot of faith, but I couldn't access it. I couldn't remember why or what it was. And so it did take me a little bit of time to understand the concept of a higher power again. And I did what was suggested, actually. They said if you couldn't understand, just pick anything outside of yourself, maybe a wave in the ocean or a mountain. And I remember I was driving to work one day and I pulled over and just prayed to the mountain and said, hey, like, show me more. Because another thing they were teaching me in the 12-step rooms was that your relationship with your higher power can grow. And I loved that. So I wanted more, right? I wanted this to grow. So I pulled over on the way to work and I prayed to a mountain and I'm like, I'm lost. Are you my higher power? If not, who is? Like, hi. And I just prayed to the mountain and had my own inner dialogue as if I would to a friend or someone that I cared deeply about. I don't know. And over time, like, I started to just call it higher power. Actually, I called it Lucy for a little bit. And I don't know why. Like, I don't know if that stems from Lucifer, and I was confused. Like, it kind of freaks me out. I only called my higher power Lucy for a few months in recovery. And then after I remembered the sacrifices, I was like, no name close to Lucifer. And then I just called it my higher power until a few years later when I remembered God. So then about 2.5 years, maybe, in my recovery, I started to remember my relationship with God. And the cage, I knew about the cage, but I didn't remember calling on him. But the cool thing is that when I knew about the cage, but hadn't remembered my relationship with God, there was like about a year period where I remembered the cage, but not God. During that year, when I had memories of the cage, I wasn't scared. So then when I remembered God, I realized I called on God early on in that cage. And it was only a little bit of time that I was scared in that cage because our Creator made me feel so comfortable after calling on him. Anyways, I experienced the memories and the flashbacks of my higher power, who I choose to call God, and that relationship that I had with him as a child. With my flashbacks, they've all unfortunately included an immense amount of pain. And when my flashbacks came up about my relationship that I had with God when I was a child, it came with an immense amount of, I can't even describe it, safety, joy, like I don't know. I fear judgment of my faith, but at the end of the day, I know my faith is so big in its own unique way, and it may scare people. So when I was remembering my relationship with God as a child, all I have to say is those were the best flashbacks ever, and they made all the other flashbacks worth it, because that source is what saves me in my life. That source is why I'm able to be here. That source is so real to me. I wouldn't be here without that source, who I choose to call God. So what does my relationship with God look like today? For me, the most important thing with my relationship with God is the relationship, right? Like, I am studying religion and in my free time, but only a little bit of time. Most of my time, when it comes to my higher power, goes to my higher power, or God. I love that relationship, and that relationship that I have with my higher power, or God, is what makes me happier in life, is what helps me get from a problem to a solution, to a triumph, is what gives me strength and hope. It's the only thing that's ever truly been there for me, the only thing or person or whatever that I fully trust. Being a religious abuse survivor, going solely to religion for recovery, I knew wasn't going to work for me because of my religious trigger. But the 12 steps have really helped me regain my faith. And I'm still not religious, but I want to read to you the second and third step in the 12 steps. 2. The second step. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. I was taught that as long as I had a relationship with my higher power and believed in a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity, that relationship would grow. My faith would grow. And that is very true. And actually, it grows very rapidly. I'm so grateful for step 2 and 3 in the 12-step programs, because it's really helped me regain my faith. And something really beautiful about my relationship with my higher power, or God, or my faith, is that it's always growing as long as I keep it close to my heart. Let's go back to this relationship that I speak so highly about with God, and how I feel it's important. I think it's very important. I think that my relationship with God is the most important part, and I feel this way because my mom was so religious, or made herself appear to be so religious, and her behaviors said likewise. So I've learned that in order for me to have the healthiest behaviors, in order for me to be my true self, in order for me to be authentic, in order for me to be a good person, that relationship is what keeps me sane. Since I've regained my relationship with my higher power, it has only grown. Clearly, it started with a mountain. Then I called it Lucy for a few months. Then I called it higher power. Then I called it God, and remembered my flashbacks about my early childhood with God. It only continues to grow. It picked up from childhood. It only continues to grow. When I spend my time strengthening my relationship with God, it grows. And it's so beautiful to me. When any of my relationships in life grow and become healthier and just more of a blessing in my life, it's beautiful, but especially with our Creator, or God, and it doesn't stop growing. As long as I stay in conscious contact and continuously turn my life and my will over to God, the one who I personally choose to trust. I like the Bible or scripture, not all of it. I have my opinions on that. I don't think anything man-made is perfect. But I do see a lot of valuable information in scripture that helps me live my life, that helps give me a blueprint to live a good life, right? Because my psycho parents didn't tell me how to live a good life. And so I learn from the 12-step programs, and I do learn some from scripture, and I do learn from religious people. I learn from not religious people. I learn from all over where I can live a sensible, healthy life in order to achieve happiness. The only thing I know is true for me is that I have a higher power who I choose to call God. That source is so true to me. And anything beyond that, I don't know. Like, for example, the devil. I don't know if there's the devil or such a place like hell where people walk around with devil horns. I just don't know. I'm not in my recovery yet where I've explored that to form my own belief. But I do believe in the enemy or dark forces. In other words, like when light triggers darkness. To me, that's the enemy. There's light and then there's darkness, like my childhood, right? My mom was following the darkness and there was light, and I consider that darkness the enemy. What does my relationship with God look like? Well, throughout the day, I continuously pray to turn my will and my life over. I don't want to dictate how my life goes. I don't want to control it. I've tried that from age 13-ish to 30 when I was in denial. It didn't work out for me. So what works for me is giving my will to a higher power that's greater than me, who I choose to call God. So I pray throughout the day so that I don't take my control back and start to control things in my life. Now, I do sometimes see myself starting to control things in my life or trying to control an outcome. And during those times, I pray extra hard, or I try to, because I'm not perfect. And at times I try to control my own life. But at the end of the day, when I rest my head, I want to pray and remind myself that my life is God's will, not mine. My will didn't work. My years of denial did not work for me. So now I turn my life over to a higher power who I choose to call God. I also maintain conscious contact with God. I do this mostly with prayer. I have a lot of room for growth in this area. I do go to meditation class about once every other week, and mindfulness. There's so many areas for me to grow in this area. It's unbelievable. But just with me praying each day and having open communication with God each day and turning my will and life over to God each day, just doing that gets me so much. If I added more conscious contact with my higher power, I could only imagine how much more that would do for me. Something that helps me stay in conscious contact with God is inviting patience into my life, my obstacles, my decisions. During my 17 years-ish of denial, I acted a lot like I reacted. I was impulsive. For example, if I were to get a really mean text towards me, I would probably have responded right away, and it wouldn't have been pretty. And today, I get to allow patience in with like any life situation, right? If I step back and I ask myself, do I have time to allow patience in? Because sometimes it's best to act with a sense of urgency if it's an emergency, but when it's not, I want to invite patience in. And I imperfectly do this today. I am by no means perfect. There are times when I still react to things, but ideally, I love to invite patience in, or God, because then when I take this situation that I'm going to God about and I have patience with it too, then that time becomes a blessing because I get to go to my support about it. I get to process my own feelings about it. I get to continuously pray to God about it, which keeps me in contact with Him. And then eventually my intuition and God feels like it aligns, and the next action for me is presented to me. And I don't feel like I'm living in my will. Like, I feel like I'm doing it with God, and He's showing me the next action, and I get to follow. Another thing that helps me stay in conscious contact with God is taking responsibility for my shortcomings or things that I do wrong to other people. I need my higher power in order to take responsibility, because God allows me to feel safe and humble enough to take responsibility for my shortcomings. When I take responsibility for my shortcomings with God, I'm granted the access and the ability and the gift to be able to change my behaviors, who I am on the inside, and apologize to other people if need be. Not only am I cleaning my side of the street, but I'm also growing as a person because I get to learn from my past mistakes when I wasn't so kind to other people. So in other words, God helps me be kind to not only myself, but to others as well. God is my number one resource, my number one cheerleader when it comes to bettering myself on the inside and becoming a better person. My relationship with my higher power or God is far from perfect. I don't keep conscious contact. I aspire to, but sometimes I might go a whole day without praying, and I can feel it by the end of the day. Sometimes I even get mad at God. 2023 wasn't the best year for me, and I remember many times I got mad at God. I was writing, "Dear God, I am so mad at you, blah, blah, blah." But you know what? I don't think my higher power or God takes it personally. He's too strong to. I think that when I write to God and I say, "I'm so mad at you, XYZ," it actually helps me express my anger. And I've never stayed mad at God. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but sometimes I get mad at my higher power and it's okay. My higher power is still there for me. In a way, even though I explained to you as a child how I was close to God, in a way, I feel like my relationship with God has just begun, and that makes me happy. There's so much room for me to grow with God and get to know Him. Guys, I love my higher power or God, and I love that I'll never be perfect. There's no such thing as perfect, so that means I can continue to grow my relationship with God and my faith, and I'm so grateful for that. I love you all, and I love our Creator and faith. So that's it for today's episode, My Faith After Religious Abuse. Today we talked a little bit about my religious abuse, how it affected me, and what I've done in order to prioritize faith in my recovery. Join me in 2 weeks from now, Monday, June 24th. Hope to see you then. If you have any questions, please ask them below. I'd really appreciate it if you clicked like and subscribe to support my speaking out journey. Thanks, friends, for listening to She Got Away, your podcast that shines light on the depths of darkness. I'm your host, Kivi Linga. When I was a child, I dreamt of becoming an artist and sharing my story. I appreciate you listening. Until next time, bye.